Hi, I'm Dominic Harland. I'm CEO and CTO of GB Labs, and we're going to talk to you today about the last 20 years or so of GB Labs and how we've seen our industry change. So winding the clock back sort of 20 years or so, we fondly remember the days where things were perhaps a little bit simpler. So you'd have one main production suite, that would be where all your video production and cutting work was done. Perhaps we would have another system, maybe across the corridor, to do our graphics on, and these would be isolated islands effectively. We may well have some sort of state-of-the-art backup system like a zip drive for argument's sakes, and then we would probably have a guy down the road who would do our audio, and perhaps a guy across town that might do our titling. And to tie this workflow together, we would be using a state-of-the-art SCSI drive. So we would connect that in, make sure it's configured in the right way, and we would stand back whilst the copy happens, and we would disconnect the drive, transport it across the corridor, across town, wherever it needs to go, and copy the files back onto that system so they could be worked on. And this kind of worked in that instance. There are your 5 islands effectively, and you would shuttle your data around. And I guess the issues with that are fairly well documented. You don't really have visibility of where all of your data is, and with making copies of data, it's all too easy for the person who's given out that data to feel that, well, their machine's not running so well, maybe they're getting fuller, and they can just delete a few of those files. At the end of the day, they've given them to the guy down the road, and we're pretty sure he's going to look after them. However, he's also experiencing similar problems and feels that, well, I've been given these files, I'm sure they've got a copy of them, so I can just do without a couple of the biggest ones just to make myself some space. Straight away, we have 3 copies of some files, and other files we have 0 copies of. And this really is the issue of the past. And I've told this story a few times, and it usually gets a chuckle of, how silly we were, and things all changed now because now we can see our storage centrally, we can manage all of our areas very easily, and we can see everything. And I think that's probably was largely the case up until certainly a couple of years ago, and things have really started to creep in and change since then. At around about that time, I think that there are some fantastic cloud services available, and wanting to utilise those is a great idea, and can allow anybody dealing with media to flex their capacity up and down in terms of functionality. So a question which I get asked quite often is, should we use the cloud, or should we invest in on-prem, either storage or services? And I think this is a personal sort of sticking point with me, and I don't see this as a choice. I don't really see that you should use the cloud or you should invest on-prem. I think that there is a benefit to having the cloud or cloud services for various things. It allows you to scale up and scale down very quickly. There's certainly things that you can do on the cloud which would be cost prohibitive if you weren't doing those things all the time, and they allow anybody dealing with media to be potentially very flexible. However, within your organisation, to have things that you are doing quite regularly, whether that's a grading suite, whether it's a full audio suite, for example, whether you're doing film scanning or any number of tasks, there is a great requirement and cost saving by having those items on-prem and to hand. It allows for great collaboration as well, which a lot of us have been finding out that collaboration when you get people in the office is not quite the same as collaboration online, and each has its place, but that doesn't mean that it's an either-or scenario. And I also think that with an on-prem, there may be good grounds to have a look around and say, well, actually 30, 40, 50% of what we do on-prem, we could do that with remote workers, or perhaps part of what we do we should put into a cloud service. But the real challenge with that is that we tend to get sucked into the marketing of, okay, well, let's go and do everything in the cloud, or let's go and do everything on-prem. And I think the reality here is that we need to sort of zoom back, if you like, and go, well, actually, if we could work with all of these things together, what would that do for us? How powerful could our organisations be if we leveraged the best of both, and what would that look like? And really the number one thing that's holding us back from doing that is the data paths. If we can get our data paths correct so that we have a central storage, for argument's sakes, that spans all of these areas and gives us the desirable workflow that we had perhaps 5 years ago when everything was pretty much just on-prem, but surrounds everything, that surely would be the absolute ideal. And with, I guess, the last being in 2020 as we are now towards the end, this year's been a challenge, and we've been wanting more home workers, as well as perhaps exploring other ways in which we could continue to work, and that's really accelerated us into arguably the unknown of what could or couldn't be done. And I think that right now what we've actually faced with is a very similar scenario as we were in 20 years ago or so. And really, as opposed to having that one main production system as we used to have, we've now got, if you think of that as our main office, if you like. So there is a central storage within there, there's a variety of things that happen within that office, but instead of having the graphics guy across the road, or across the street, that's really the people who are now working from home. And there's a temptation to just give them data on a removable drive and let them carry on with it, much as back in the day with the graphics suites. And really, if we think about our backup or our titlers or audio guys that were off-site, if we think of those in terms of our cloud services or perhaps our cloud storage in today's world, we've effectively got these islands back again. Now, the real difference is 20 years ago, we probably had 5 islands perhaps in an average scenario. And today, you might have 5, 10, 20 home workers. You've got obviously your main office, and that might have one or more central storage systems. And in terms of cloud, you might have some sort of cloud storage, but you've probably got quite a number of cloud services, whether they are delivery services, whether they're encoding services, or whether they're services for audio, keying, whatever it might be. And what a lot of people perhaps don't appreciate is that all of those services, they all function on this commodity called data. So you have to give them data. They do something with that data, and they then produce data as a result. And it's that handling of that data that is as challenging today as it was 20 years ago, because the concept of the cloud is a little bit of a misnomer, really. I've often said that the chances that your data on 2 cloud services or storage and a service are on the same continent it's possible. The chances that they're in the same country, town, data center or server is very remote. So it's very important to understand that the cloud is not this one thing, and actually as a series of islands we have to manage our data throughout them. And quite often data within media, we work project based, and that data can be moved and is frequently moved, the same files from one to another and then back to another one, and perhaps that same file is then pulled again and again. And this is a bit problematic, and it's very costly, not only from any fees that might be associated with moving the data, but also the time involved as well. They're not functioning in the same way that we all expected them to work a year ago. We have to wait for this data to move from effectively one server in one data center to another data center that could be on the other side of the world, and this is time consuming and challenging. And really, further to those challenges, we've also got our home workers as well. And the problem which we've really seen in the past with that is that when we just give them a drive to go and work on, we can obviously be very, very prescriptive about how they choose to operate. But one of the issues is that we don't know whether those files are going to be accidentally renamed or deleted. And once they've done whatever the work they've done on those drives, when those drives are returned back to head office or central office, we're always in a little bit of a quandary with what to do with that data. So if we've taken data from our central storage and we've sent it out of the building, there's been some work acted on it. Clearly some of that work is required and useful, but do we merge the data back? Do we risk overwriting or renaming bits and pieces? Or do we just simply create a new folder, dump it in there and say we'll deal with that later, which is unfortunately a fairly popular choice. And again, over recent events, what we've seen is this scale from maybe a handful of home workers to actually the majority of the organisation becoming remote and home workers as well. And that's very challenging as well. The other really significant problem with today's workflows is that we've been very cautious over the last few years at bringing in control, who can access our data. It's a pretty hot topic, to the point where as a company we've introduced a full-scale auditing within our products so that customers can not only have the usual user permissions and they can have analytics of how they're consuming their data, but they can actually audit and see who's done what on their data. And unfortunately, when you're starting to send data out on USB drives, whatever it is, and when you're perhaps interacting with many different cloud accounts and you don't have an individual who's responsible for that, you're now allowing many different people within your organisation to access and take away data, as well as if you've given them permission to go to this cloud service or that cloud storage because they're no longer in the office and that's the easiest route for them, you've also potentially breached your own username or your own credentials within your organisation, and that's understandable given the turmoil that we've been faced at the moment. But these are definite challenges which we have been thinking about and actually have a large number of answers to as well over the last year or so. Given the challenges today, there's also one other sort of critical element which has sort of been diluted massively over the last few months or so, and that's really been able to find and organise any of your media, any of your assets as well. As soon as we start spreading out our content into different islands of locations, if you like, it becomes very difficult to have one pane of glass, if you like, to go and look at all of where your items are. So even if you wanted to try to organise and make sure that you don't have duplication or that people are not renaming all the rest of it, the actual visibility into all of those different storage areas, whether they're the storage area within a cloud service or whether they're a pure cloud storage, whether they're your on-prem or whether they're the various drives across your home workers, is incredibly difficult. And that is a challenge for every organisation at the moment. And I feel what we are trying to do at the moment, we're trying to scramble to try to find something new. And I feel that in some ways, some of the people that I've spoken to, we're almost getting a bit lost in technology at the moment. We've spent 20 years or so since the idea of that single workstation. And over the last 20 years, we've built up a pretty good workflow of how we can organise everything from ingest to the files to anything that we do with those files and to the output. Just because right now there's a great big smashing hole in that workflow doesn't mean that we have to throw away everything that we've previously developed. And I think that the struggle is not only trying to get technology to do something, people are also trying to scramble to try and find or to try and turn workflow on its head. And I'm not saying that we have the perfect workflow and things should never change, because they should evolve. But my belief, and I think the belief which I have as GB Labs, is that really what we are doing is we are empowering people to work with today's restrictions or the way that people want to utilise these separate islands, if you like, but allowing them to work with those islands in a way which they were used to working less than a year ago. And that's really what I see as the future for our industry.